The handcuffs clicked around my wrists on a Tuesday afternoon in broad daylight, in front of 47 witnesses, while I was standing next to a car that had my name on the title. The cop's hand was on my neck, pressing my face against the hood of my own Lamborghini Huracan, the one I'd worked 12 years to buy. And all I could hear was him saying, "Stop resisting, boy." I wasn't resisting. I was barely breathing. And before that afternoon was over, his department would have a very expensive problem on its hands. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 34 years old, and I run a digital marketing agency out of Atlanta that does about $4 million in revenue a year. I grew up in Decatur, in a house with a leaking roof and a mother who worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. She used to say, "Baby, the world doesn't owe you a thing, but that doesn't mean you can't take it anyway." I took that to heart. By 22, I had my first client. By 28, I had 12 employees. By 32, I had a corner office on Peachtree Street and a parking spot with my name on it. The Lamborghini was a birthday present I gave myself when I turned 33. Matte black, Huracan Evo. I remember the day I drove it off the lot. My business partner Darnell called me immediately after I posted a photo. "Man," he said, laughing so hard I could barely understand him, "your mama is going to have a heart attack." She didn't have a heart attack. She cried. Good tears, the kind that come when something you once only dared to dream about is suddenly sitting in your driveway, real and solid and yours. I'd been to a client meeting downtown. Standard stuff, quarterly review, new campaign strategy, the kind of meeting where everyone shakes hands and nobody says anything particularly memorable. I left the office around 3, stopped at a gas station on Piedmont to fill up, grabbed a bottle of water. The sun was still high. I remember that specifically. The way it bounced off the hood of the car, blinding white. I put on my sunglasses, pulled back onto the road, and within 2 blocks, I saw the lights in my rearview mirror. I wasn't speeding. I had my seatbelt on. My registration was current, my insurance was active, and my tags had been renewed in June. I pulled over immediately, put both hands on the steering wheel, because I'm a black man in America, and I learned that lesson before I learned how to drive, and waited. I heard the patrol car door open. I heard boots on asphalt. And then Officer Dale Pruitt leaned into my window and said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "Nice car. Whose is it?" I told him it was mine. He asked me to step out of the vehicle. I asked why. "Because I said so," he told me, and the smile disappeared. I stepped out slowly, hands visible, moving like I was made of glass. I told him clearly, calmly, the way you learn to talk when the alternative is unthinkable, that I had my registration and proof of insurance in the glove compartment, and I'd be happy to provide them. He wasn't interested. He told me to face the car and put my hands on the roof. I said, "Officer, I haven't done anything wrong." He grabbed my arm, spun me around, and pressed my face against the hood. The metal was hot from the sun. I felt the skin on my cheekbones start to burn. "Stop resisting," he said. I wasn't resisting. My arms were limp, my feet were planted. I was so still I could hear my own pulse in my ears, loud and fast and terrified. The handcuffs went on. He walked me to the patrol car and put me in the back seat. I sat there for 22 minutes while he ran my plates. Plates that came back clean, registered to Marcus A. Webb of 1440 Northside Drive, Atlanta, Georgia. While he sat in his car, I watched people slow down as they drove past. A woman took a picture on her phone. A man in a delivery truck shook his head. 2 teenagers on the sidewalk filmed it from start to finish. I didn't know it then, but those teenagers' video 41 seconds of me, hands cuffed behind my back, leaning against a police cruiser next to my Lamborghini, would have 3 million views by the following morning. Pruitt eventually came back, opened my door, uncuffed me. He handed me back my license and registration without a word of explanation. I asked him, as steady as I could, given that my hands were shaking badly enough that the cards rattled against each other, what the reason for the stop had been. "Routine," he said. "Have a good day." He walked back to his cruiser. He didn't write a single ticket, because there was nothing to write a ticket for. There had never been anything to write a ticket for. I sat in the driver's seat of my car for a long time after he pulled away. Long enough for the heat from the hood to fade, long enough for my breathing to slow. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, the red mark on my cheekbone, the crease in my collar where his hand had grabbed me. And I made myself a promise, not out of rage. The rage came later. In that moment, I was perfectly, surgically calm, which is somehow more frightening. I started the car. I drove. The first person I called was my mother. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Baby, are you hurt?" I said no. She said, "Good. Then we fight." Just like that. No dramatics, no falling apart. She'd been preparing for that sentence her whole life, and she delivered it without a single tremor. The second person I called was my attorney, Jordan Caldwell. Jordan had handled my business contracts since the beginning, sharp, methodical, the kind of lawyer who speaks in short sentences and never raises her voice because she never needs to. When she called me back 20 minutes later, the first thing she said was, "Tell me you didn't sign anything." I hadn't. "Good. Don't talk to anyone from the department. Send me that video. And Marcus..." She paused just long enough that I felt it. "Don't post anything. Not yet." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and a glass of bourbon I wasn't drinking, going through everything I could find about Officer Dale Pruitt. He'd been on the force for 9 years. He had 2 prior complaints on file, both from black men, both dismissed, both citing language and use of force during traffic stops. I printed the complaint forms. I printed his department ID photo. I printed the incident report he'd filed, which I'd obtained through a same-day records request, and which described me as uncooperative and verbally aggressive. I read that phrase 3 times. Verbally aggressive. I had said 4 sentences. I put the papers in a folder. I wrote the date on the tab. And then I went to bed. Because I had a business to run in the morning, and because I had learned, the hard way, over 34 years, that exhaustion is not something you get to surrender to when the fight hasn't even started. But I didn't sleep. I lay on my back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about those teenagers on the sidewalk, and the video with 3 million views, and the very specific weight of metal handcuffs on wrists that had done absolutely nothing wrong. And I thought, I didn't know yet that Pruitt had done this before. Not twice, 7 times in 4 years. And that every single complaint had been buried by the same man. But that was the second layer. And I was about to find it. Jordan called me the next morning at 7:45. I was already at my kitchen table. I'd never really left it. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Marcus, I need you to sit down," she said, and I told her I was already sitting. I pulled Pruitt's full record, not the public file, the full internal affairs archive. 7 complaints in 4 years. All black men, all traffic stops. 3 involved physical contact. 1 man filed a federal complaint and then dropped it 3 weeks later. Someone from the department came to his job and strongly suggested he reconsider. The silence on my end lasted long enough that Jordan said my name. "I'm here," I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended. "Who buried them?" "A lieutenant named Carl Hess, Pruitt's direct supervisor. They went to college together. Hess was best man at Pruitt's wedding." She let that sit. "This isn't one bad cop, Marcus. This is a system that has been actively protecting one bad cop for 4 years. That changes the scope of the lawsuit considerably." I pressed my thumb into the corner of the folder on the table, the cardboard edge sharp enough to feel. 7 men. 7 times someone had sat in the back of that cruiser, hands cuffed, watching the world drive past. 7 complaints filed and then quietly strangled. And I had almost become number 8, except for 2 teenagers and their phones. "How much?" I asked. "We're looking at Section 1983, civil rights, unlawful seizure, excessive force, racial discrimination, pattern, and practice. With 7 prior incidents and documented suppression. Marcus, we're naming the city, not just Pruitt. 1.2 million. I wrote the number on the legal pad. $1,200,000. I underlined it once. The department's PR office released a statement Friday calling the stop routine and lawful, and describing me as having displayed aggressive behavior. The same phrase from the incident report. Verbally aggressive. They were going to stand behind it. What I hadn't expected was the call I got that evening from a man named Deshaun Carter, one of the 7. He'd been stopped by Pruitt 3 years ago. Pruitt had used his knee on the back of Deshaun's neck, while Deshaun was face down on the pavement beside his own car. A 4-year-old Honda, not a Lamborghini. He'd filed a complaint. 6 weeks later, 2 officers showed up at the restaurant where he worked. They sat at the counter and watched him for 2 hours and left without ordering anything. "I dropped the complaint," Deshaun said. There was no bitterness in his voice, just a flat, exhausted honesty that was somehow worse than anger. "I had 2 kids and a lease coming up. Would you be willing to testify now?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "You think this one's going to be different?" "I think," I said slowly, "that this time there's a video, and a lawyer who doesn't scare, and someone who can afford to see it through." "Yeah," he finally said. "Yeah, I'll testify." 4 of the 7 men eventually agreed to go on record. Jordan added their affidavits to the filing. There were nights during those weeks when the weight of it all was difficult to carry cleanly. I remember one evening when I sat in the parking garage beneath my office and couldn't make myself get out of the car. Just sat there in the dark with the engine ticking as it cooled, thinking about what it actually costs to fight something like this. Not in money, in sleep, in the way you start to see the shape of something ugly everywhere you look, once you know it's there. But I got out of the car. I always got out of the car. The deposition happened 6 weeks later. Pruitt came in with the department's attorney, practiced calm, slightly bored, the manner of a man who had done this before, and expected the outcome to be the same. Jordan laid out the timeline. She laid out the 7 complaints. She played the 41-second video on a laptop turned to face him, and he watched it without visible reaction. "Officer Pruitt," Jordan said, setting down her pen with a small, deliberate click. "In your incident report, you described Mr. Webb as verbally aggressive. Could you point to the specific moment in this video where that aggression occurs?" He looked at the frozen screen. He looked at Jordan. He looked at his attorney. "My client," the attorney began. Your client filed a report, Jordan said, her voice carrying a pleasant, room-temperature quality that was somehow the most dangerous thing in the room. I'm asking him to reconcile it with the recorded evidence. The silence stretched. Outside the conference room, a phone rang twice and stopped. Pruitt finally said, "The video doesn't capture the full context." Jordan smiled. The kind of smile that means the trial is already over. "We have 6 witnesses who would like to provide additional context," she said. "We can schedule those depositions at your convenience." The department made their first offer 2 days later. Insultingly low, the kind of number that tells you they still think you'll blink. I didn't blink. Then the video crossed 5 million views. 3 national news programs ran segments. Lieutenant Hess gave a press conference calling the lawsuit opportunistic and praising Pruitt's exemplary record. A journalist pulled Pruitt's file the following morning. 2 of the 7 complaints were visible in a public database Hess's office had apparently forgotten existed. By evening, Hess was no longer giving press conferences. The settlement offer came on a Wednesday. $1.2 million. Full amount. Jordan had also negotiated, with a tenacity I can only call surgical, a provision requiring an independent audit of all complaints filed against officers in Hess's division over the preceding 5 years. Pruitt was placed on administrative leave pending the audit. 4 months later, he resigned. Hess retired 6 weeks after that, quietly on a Friday afternoon, with no press release. I remember the morning the wire transfer cleared. My phone buzzed with the bank notification, and I looked at it for a long time without doing anything. Darnell came in an hour later and found me still staring at it. "You good?" he said. "Yeah," I said. "I think I actually am." That afternoon, I drove home the long way, through Buckhead, down Piedmont, past the gas station on the corner where I'd filled up that Tuesday in September. I slowed as I passed the stretch of road where the lights had flashed in my mirror. There was nothing there now. Just asphalt and afternoon light and the ordinary noise of the city. I put the windows down. The car did what it always did, low and fast and entirely, indisputably mine. My mother called that evening. She'd seen something about the settlement online. "Baby," she said, "did you win?" I thought about Deshaun Carter and the other men who testified, and the audit working its way through 5 years of buried complaints, and the fact that Pruitt no longer had a badge. "Yeah, Mama," I said. "We won." "I knew it," she said. And then, quieter. "Just for me?" "I knew it." I set the phone down on the passenger seat. The sun was going down over Atlanta, painting the hood of the Lamborghini in shades of copper and gold, transformed now from that blinding, hostile white it had been on the day my face was pressed against it. The world doesn't owe you a thing, but you can take it anyway. And if they try to take it back, you make sure the cost is one they never forget.